passage of AB 832, the new rent relief law. This is a huge step to building an equitable economic recovery. And of course, let me also pause to express our appreciation to our federal partners at Treasury and the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. In early May, Governor Newsom laid out the comeback plan, outlining a comprehensive set of solutions to address the most stubborn challenges facing our state. Briefly, the comeback plan provides immediate relief to middle-class families, to small businesses, and to communities that had been hardest hit by this pandemic. It also doubles down on confronting the homelessness and housing affordability crisis that is impacting our state by making a commitment to historic budget investments to keep families housed, to expand housing production and affordability, and to prevent and end homelessness. Pertinent to today's session, the comeback plan also included the governor's proposal to help low-income Californians pay 100% of unpaid rent and utilities. It includes $5.2 billion for renters and landlords, $2 billion to help Californians pay overdue utility bills, and also significant funding for tenant legal services. And as I mentioned earlier, just last night, Governor Newsom signed into law AB 832, which makes the statutory changes necessary to provide 100% payment of past and future rents and utilities, and it also extends critical eviction protections. So that's 100% rental assistance payments to eligible households to keep renters housed and to make landlords whole. The bill also includes, as I mentioned, critical protections for all Californians that are eligible for this program. It extends the eviction protections by 3 months through September 30th of 2021. And there are also additional protections for eligible tenants that take effect October 1st and go through March 31st of 2022. Our rental assistance team at the California Housing and Community Development Department, also known as HCD, is ready to implement these changes on top of the program enhancements that were made earlier this month following Treasury guidance and also the feedback that we received from diverse stakeholders. Just last month, I had the opportunity, along with Director Velasquez, to visit with a number of local partner network groups in Bell Gardens. We heard from them many requests to make improvements to the program, including increasing language access, making the application more user-friendly, and expanding the network of local resources. And we heard you. Your feedback and the level of engagement was instrumental in getting us here. And I'm truly appreciative to all of you for being part of this program, for working with us in partnership, and for getting us to this point. Let me also pause to lift up the work of local jurisdictions across the state that are administering rent relief programs in their communities and providing the resources to their communities. Thank you for what you're doing. We look forward to continuing to work with you as we move into this next phase of rent relief. Since launching the California COVID-19 Rent Relief Program, we have received well over 140,000 applications and paid out $71 million in rent relief support. This is good, but it's not good enough. The adjustments under AB 832 and the program improvements that I've described will enable the state to get funds out more quickly and to ensure that these dollars reach those hardest hit members of our communities. The mission of this effort is to eradicate rental debt in the short term and to provide ongoing support to landlords and renters to build a stable housing market and an equitable recovery. To assist us, we have relied on locally based organizations up and down the state. We have currently just over 100 local partners throughout the state providing on-the-ground assistance to those most in need, frankly serving as a bridge to this program and helping us increase access, participation, and connection to this program. We simply cannot do this work without you. Your partnership is critically important as we go into this next phase of the rent relief program. You're all valued partners, and my ask of you today, as you learn more about AB 832, is that you continue to partner with us and assist us with getting this information out to your communities, and continuing also to provide feedback on ways for us to be able to improve our overall education, outreach, and efforts. We have the resources and the will to ensure that anyone that needs the help receives it. We want to ensure that no one gets left behind. And now let me turn this over to Amy Wilson, our Deputy Secretary of Legislation. She's going to walk you through a number of more details and then continue on with additional stuff. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you. Veronica, go ahead and start the slide. So I'm going to just walk you through some of the provisions within AB 832. First and foremost, it authorizes the use of the federal rental assistance dollars that came from the federal government under the American Rescue Plan Act. Those are the second kind of round of funds that the state received from the federal government for rental assistance. The first round arrived much earlier this year. So together, those two rounds of funding total an estimated $5.2 billion in federal dollars to the state and to local governments that can be used for rental assistance. So AB 832 gave us the opportunity with this new funding that was arriving to think about adjustments to the rental assistance, the statewide program, to expedite the funding and also to provide additional support to tenants and landlords throughout the state. In addition to authorizing the funding, the program is now authorized through that statute to compensate tenants and landlords at 100% for their unpaid and prospective or future rent and utilities. So previously, you may recall there was different program parameters in place. So this enables us to make them uniform across both, whether it's a tenant initiated or a landlord initiated application, that either of those situations will receive 100% payment. In addition, importantly, the bill also extends eviction protections that were in place and set to expire at the end of this month. It extends them through September. I'll do a little bit more about that on the next slide. So I'll just say that right now. And then after September, beginning in October, it establishes a temporary alternative court process related to evictions. So Veronica, go ahead and change the slide, and we can look a little bit more concretely about the eviction protections that are in place. So as I said, it extends the current protections through the month of September. And it's the same eligibility and declaration requirements that have been in place that you should be familiar with. The tenant is, if the tenant is unable to pay their rent due to a COVID-19 financial hardship, they can provide a declaration. We have those declarations translated in the most prevalent languages available on our website. It is the landlord's obligation to share those forms, but they also can be found on our website. So the tenant provides that. Their other obligation is that they must pay 25% of their monthly rent. Although they do, if they're unable to pay it in the month, they must pay it at least by the end of that protected period, by September 30th. 25% of all of the rent for the months missed during this period. It's important to know that, so if the tenant meets those obligations, the declaration, and they have paid their 25% obligation, they are protected from eviction for not being able to pay their full rent at the end of the protected period. But importantly, the debt still accrues. It just cannot be used as the basis for an eviction at the end of September 30th. So go ahead and switch the slides, please. The other thing that 832 does is it maintains most or all of the protections that were in the prior bill that was enacted earlier this year related to debt and consumer protections for tenants. For instance, this is not exhaustive right here. This is just a sampling of the list, but for instance, there is a prohibition on landlords for the selling or assigning of any tenant debt. It also extends debt masking protections related to COVID-19 debt. And that masking is through the protected period generally, but it's permanent for households that would be eligible for the rental assistance, that 80% AMI or lower. It also extends the time limitation on landlords for pursuing rental debt through the small claims court, and maintains that same process where landlords must show that they have made a good faith effort to assist the tenant in accessing financial assistance, and the judge can take that into consideration when considering damages. Another protection that is also maintained in this recently signed bill is the homeowner protections related to forbearance requests. This is a consumer protection that if they are denied a request for forbearance from their lender, they have the right to receive a detailed explanation as to what were the deficiencies in the request, and then they have a right to, they have a period of time in which they can fix those deficiencies and be reconsidered. So let's move to the next one. And then just very briefly, won't get into the weeds on this one, but after September 30th, beginning October 1 and through March 31st of next year, 2022, a modified civil procedure will be in place for unlawful detainer actions. And the intention is to continue a level of protection for tenants that are eligible for rental assistance. Perhaps they still have not received it or have not accessed it yet. And so this would be kind of a safety net situation whereby if after October 1st, you're unable to still pay your rent, there is yet another process that is in place. But at the same time, it acknowledges for landlords that they may have the opportunity to move forward with an eviction for non-payment in those situations where the person would not be eligible for the assistance and is above that income level. It's a relatively detailed process. It does not go into effect until October 1. So between now and then, we'll be working on materials and explanatory information for Housing is Key. And certainly as the time approaches, we'll be doing more outreach and education as to rights and obligations under that process. So I believe at this point, I'm going to transition over to my colleague, Miles White. He's going to talk about the rental assistance program.
Great, thanks, Amy. Next slide, please, Veronica. All right, so as Amy and the secretary mentioned, in terms of the key program updates, and I noticed a couple of questions in the chat to this effect, and I'll try to touch on those as well, a little quicker than typing. But fundamentally with AB 832, the main, updates, of course, adjustments of the compensation level, really with mindful of the funds available for round one and round two, really frankly, the doubling of amount of assistance that state and local governments are receiving for rental assistance really made it very clear that we would be able to move to this compensation level. So the topping off of these 100% payments for all of those, whether it's landlord or tenant, applications that have been already assisted at the state level, we'll be doing that in the next 7 to 14 days. That's our expectation, to be able to be very immediate in providing that additional relief very shortly over to the thousands of households we've already served at the state level. So really excited about that update in particular. Moving to really the next item and key program updates. This is a really significant change in terms of changing the non-occupancy requirements that were initially included in SB 91, really specific to making sure folks who, whether self-evicted or a series of kind of events have unfolded in which there still is rental debt associated with that tenant household, making sure we open up the program to allow for assistance to this effect. It would be constituted as a rental arrear, and really excited to be able to start addressing this rental debt that is very clear to us, the evidence we have in terms of both landlords and tenants really needing that assistance from folks who for the last year are in need, but are no longer occupying the unit in question. And similar to that, one of the main changes as well with AB 832 was revising the definition of what constitutes a rental arrear. Initially with SB 91 back in January, there was a clearly defined limit of what constitutes a rental arrear. This change in AB 832 opens up the door for the definition of what would be a rental arrear, which would provide us far more flexibility, not just the state, but also conforming local programs to make sure we get as much funds out as possible with rental arrears, so we are not limited by the federal requirements for prospective rent in terms of 3 months of assistance at a time. So really excited about this change as well. We think it can make a really significant impact on program performance, both for the state and local levels. Then the last item here, just to note, there were some updates in terms of AB 832 requiring direct to tenant payments, whether it be for rental arrears or prospective assistance, to make sure that there's a really kind of clear signal that makes sure folks who receive this assistance must pay it within 15 business days to the landlords. So just it's kind of an abundance of caution, but also that's already contemplated in our administrative protocols that we have in terms of accepting that assistance. So all told, these are really kind of the handful of significant program updates as a result of AB 832. And just really quick, I think one thing that sticks out, and I think a series of questions in the chat in terms of the timing, some of these changes will be far more immediate than others. For instance, topping off of payments or adjusting the calculation for the state program. That's something we're currently working on now, and actually the compensation levels have already been adjusted, and some other kind of items will take a little bit more time in terms of implementation, whether it's application adjustments, what have you, but we're definitely hitting the ground running as fast as we can. So next item, please, Veronica. And in terms of, on the programmatic side with AB 832, really simply, our intention was to keep everything as consistent as possible. And I think ultimately, the eligibility prioritization, a lot of it, even from the start with SB 91 is modeled off of the federal statute that we're all working under, in terms of eligibility based on 80% AMI below, housing instability, experience of homeless, COVID hardship, all of that remains the same. And in particular with our prioritization, the state program still is prioritizing assistance for rental arrears. It's really critical. But the one main, update to that is making sure folks who've received a pay or quit notice or a summons, of course, we want to make sure we're prioritizing that as well. That's something we've been really kind of mindful of, especially with a series of eviction, protections that have been, instituted, and making sure folks who have received that pay or quit notice can be, prioritized accordingly. And then, in terms of eligible uses, again, consistent with the first round of funding, no changes, there. I think one thing that's really just critical to us is to provide as much consistency as possible and, provide, that flexibility as well for a lot of these local programs to make sure, folks have the maximum flexibility to expend their resources as needed. And next slide. Thank you, Veronica. And just to wrap up, this component, I think so a lot of folks who are on this Zoom have kind of been in tune with some of our recent kind of administrative changes on the program improvements, particularly the tenant application, really trying to streamline those efforts to reduce any unnecessary kind of documentation or reduce kind of any barriers in terms of understanding of the application, and really with the goal of making this as easy and accessible as possible. So really excited about those efforts. So we just wanted to raise those efforts up as well, and alluded to in the chat as well. Really, there will be a couple of updates that we'll have to make to tenant application as well, the landlord application, due to some changes from AB 832, but it will not be a dramatic difference from what we're currently working with. And frankly, any other, as we move forward with this, definitely we're interested in any other kind of enhancements or streamlining that we're able to do. So really appreciate everyone's thoughts on this, a very iterative process to make this as easy and accessible as possible. I think with that, Veronica covers it. Turn it to you.
Great, thank you, Miles, Amy, and Secretary. So I will just go into a few brief slides, but I just want to also mention that we have heard stories on the ground from our local partner network and also applicants that ever since we streamlined the application process, it went from taking about 3 hours to less than an hour to apply for rent relief. So again, we thank every stakeholder out there who had provided input and feedback into that process to really get us to a point where we can help individuals that are most in need and quickly get that done. So the program's flexible, it's iterative, and we definitely are hearing the feedback and making changes where possible. And on that note, we did also hear a lot that our website was a little hard to navigate and needed to be translated professionally into different languages. So we have released just yesterday this new and hopefully improved website that has easy navigation. It's easy to find the Apply Now button that's located on all of our pages. And at the top, you'll see the buttons to be able to get to the page in whichever language that you need, via it be Spanish, Tagalog, Chinese, and others. So again, just showcasing that we are flexible and making program changes where needed to really help our applicants. And really, this program is based on the help of reaching people where they are. And we built the program with the mindset of needing to have trusted messengers and needing to have organizations throughout the state that are ready and available to help applicants. And so we have a network of over 100 partners statewide. They're our local partner network, and we thank them every day for the work that they're doing to help Californians most in need. They're available to serve people in 22 different languages in person and more over the phone. They're able to get help filling out an application. You need help uploading required paperwork, they're there to also assist. And if you need somebody to pick up any paperwork to submit for the application, they're available. Strongly encourage you to visit our website to see which organizations are serving your jurisdictions, or you could call and make an appointment at 833-687-0967. And lastly, we are also dedicated to creating materials to provide to help educate people about the program. We have them available in multiple languages. They're available on our Dropbox, which were also included in the email that was sent out noticing this webinar. And we really, if there's something in there that you see that is missing that you would like for either your organization to help promote the program, definitely reach out to us. We're more than happy to develop and create content as needed. And we really just want to make sure that we're reaching individuals through every method that we can. And I'm happy to ask for your assistance here and help us promote this program and help us get the word out. And with that, I will open it up for some questions. I know that people have been responding in the chat. And if you do have questions after this webinar, you can email us at erap@hcd.ca.gov. And let me stop sharing here. And We have a question. Could ERAP2 funds be used to pay for a court employee as part of an eviction diversion program?
I'm happy to take that one, Veronica. I think one thing that we really relied upon with the eligible uses, same with SB 91, is really utilizing just technical cross-reference to the federal statute. So to the extent federal guidance allows for such a situation, it sounds actually like this would just initially sound like a eligible use through other housing-related expenses, which I know Treasury just updated guidance on this last week. So happy to kind of look into this a little bit more in detail, but I think ultimately, just like the United States Treasury, the state, we're trying to provide as much flexibility locally with these funds and for a lot of these kind of innovative efforts, especially on broadly stabilizing households. So I think this would sound like a really good fit for that.
Great. I have just a quick question. Are housing authorities eligible for the funding now, Miles?
Yes, absolutely. And that's actually, to that point, Veronica, really exciting change with AB 32 going to full compensation. Series of conversations with a lot of our friends across the state on, at the housing authority level. It's really kind of the concern with the prior compensation structure. So we're really excited about the change to full compensation, and we're really even to that end trying to find ways in some ongoing discussions with Treasury to find a lot more streamlined efforts to provide eligibility determinations in a kind of a proxy level, so we can really streamline the amount of funds we can made available. So we're continuing to evaluate those efforts, and hopefully we can really move those funds quickly as possible, especially for individuals within housing authorities.
Great. Another question. If people owe rent to relatives for their rent, are they eligible? And I will hand that over to Hank.
I'm sorry, Veronica, can you repeat that question, please?
If people owe rent to relatives for their rent, are they eligible?
Understood. I appreciate that question. So as long as there's a proper landlord and tenant relationship established, whether that's in a written lease agreement or any sort of documentation denoting the landlord and tenancy relationship, that's entirely allowed. So.
Great. Another question is, what is housing related services? Are there any examples? Amy, are you able to handle that one?
Hi. I think Miles can supplement me, but housing related services can be, there's a range of them. For instance, relocation or down deposit assistance, things like that. Miles, I'm just blanking on some of the other ones, but I know there are many more.
For sure. No, relocation services, I think any kind of particularly just household stabilizing, security deposits, anything that in terms of trying to make sure folks are able to establish, new residents, and anything that's kind of like upstart costs. Naturally to this, I'm going to just pop in some of the most recent definitions on this so everyone can kind of follow. But it is, I think, consistent with what Treasury is talking about this. It's really intended to be in a way, a kind of a catch-all provision for provide that flexibility. And that's certainly how we envision interpreting it as well. So I'll pop it in the chat in a few moments.
Great. And I'm just reading a chat question that I can answer, I think. Do you know when the new forms and translations will be available on Housing is Key? And if those are related to the eviction protection forms, they will be up by no later than July 15th. And some more questions. Any changes made regarding shadow debt where a tenant has taken out a loan, borrowed from a friend, run up credit card debt, etc., to make rent payments in the last 15 months? And I will hand that to either Amy or Miles. Me?
I'm happy to answer that question. That is a very challenging issue that we've been confronting because we know that people have done all they can to maintain stability for their families by borrowing and from others, or using other types of debt products in order to maintain their stability for their families. And unfortunately, the way the federal law is written, we are not allowed to cover those other types of debt that are experienced by renters that they've incurred. But we do feel that, and we feel hopeful about the 100% prospective payments that we are able to make for renters, because we hope that by helping to assist in these 3-month increments moving forward, that will create some cash flow for people who have to meet their obligations for these other debts. And hopefully slowly they can start to, chip away at those debts.
Great, thank you. So there's a question here too. They'd like to know, does it matter if a person is undocumented and wants rent assistance? And what are the tax consequences of receiving rent assistance? So the program is available to all Californians regardless of immigration status, and the application does not require you to show proof of citizenship, so it's open to everybody. And for renters, the assistance is not counted as income, and so I don't believe there's a tax consequence there, but I'll let Amy and Miles confirm. And for landlords, it would be considered income. So
Yeah, perfect.
And question, some tenants have been evicted because they could not pay their rent and lost their job due to the contingencies of COVID-19. And to get into a new place, they are required to pay first month rent and same amount for deposit in advance, and want to know if they can get assistance for that. Miles?
Could you repeat that one more time for me, please, Veronica?
So for tenants that have been evicted because they could not pay their rent and lost their job due to contingencies of COVID, and they want to get a new place that require first month and a deposit, can they get assistance for that?
Yes, and actually, I think that ties directly with the question earlier in terms of relocation expenses, and even to that end, in terms of our stability efforts, relocation expenses and even prospective assistance, then to the extent that there's continued need. And one item that I would just emphasize in this vein is with the subsequent round 2 funding received from Treasury, according to that, in terms of both round 1 and round 2, there's up to a total of 18 months of assistance that can be provided for eligible households. So very much so, a short-term stability program, but also to the extent, folks need help with relocation assistance and then prospective assistance from there. This program is definitely envisions to that effort. So.
Great, thank you. So there's an anonymous question. If the landlord doesn't apply, is the tenant still getting 25%? And so with this new law, the tenant would be eligible for the 100% even if the landlord does not apply.
Yes, for both rental arrears and prospective assistance. So yes, direct to tenant payments or vision.
I'll chime in to just add that the law does require that in accepting the payment, the tenant is agreeing to remit that to the landlord within 15 days. And they, in completing that application, they attest to, under penalty of perjury, that they are agreeing to do that. So for landlords out there, that is part of the expectation in a tenant directed payment.
Great, thank you. When these are all great questions, by the way, and if we don't get to them all, we'll capture them and send out an email to everybody with the responses. I know it's after 5 o'clock and families need to get home to have dinner, but we'll stay on for another bit longer. When you make recipients whole topping off, will you be sending a notice with the new payment protection language, remit payment to the landlord within 15 business days? Hank, I'll pass this one over to you.
Yeah, of course, Veronica. So we already have the language drafted, and this will be going out very shortly to all individuals that have received assistance prior from the program. So this will go to both the landlord and the tenant, and we're anticipating this to be distributed in the very near future. So once the topping off notification has gone out in the coming weeks, we're looking to get the additional assistance payment dispersed following the same disbursement method that was previously chosen and confirmed by the tenant or the landlord, depending on who the payment had gone out to originally.
Great, and we'll review that language again and make sure that the remit payment to the landlord within 15 business days is included. Thank you for that.
And if I could, Veronica, there's one question in particular in the chat I'd like to take. Amy Costa had a question about, what the impacts of these changes in AB 832 would be for local jurisdictions. The selected option B in the first round, and folks, I think not everyone should be aware, but option B, this administrative option, which locals are administering both their direct share from the United States Treasury as well as their share of state funds locally. So to that, Amy, the option Bs with round one as well as with round two, to be a conforming local program, it has to be following the standards, established by the state, and that is effectuated through the standard agreements we have for round one, and also in the coming round, the standard agreements for round two. And just to that end, I would just emphasize that one of the kind of key changes in AB 832 as well is providing flexibility to local jurisdictions, whether their decision in round one was one administrative option or the other, the ability upon the approval of the department to elect to change the administrative option, just like we've made changes at the state level with in light of some of the changes in terms of funds available and guidance from Treasury. We've made changes to our approach, and I fully expect some local jurisdictions will contemplate that as well. So that's one thing we really want to stress, not just for round one, but also for round two. One administrative option in a local jurisdiction is not set in stone for the duration of the program. So, and we'll be beginning with HCD and the ramp up of round two to have those conversations with each of these local jurisdictions as specifically after enactment of this bill, 30 days will be the time period for folks to apply, and so we'll definitely be having those conversations in the weeks to come.
Thank you.
Miles, I just wanted to chime in. I very much appreciate that you brought up this point, and to really just sort of concretely, if you're an option C jurisdiction and you're looking to maybe move to an option B or even an option A, you have the opportunity to be able to do that. And so over the course of the next few days, HCD, as Miles mentioned, will be proactively reaching out and providing additional information on AB 832 and the parameters of the law, but also very much welcome the opportunity to to revisit the option that jurisdictions have selected, and to work together to make sure that you have what you need to be able to get this program out to both renters and landlords in your communities. So this is an option that's now available because of AB 832. It was not something that was available under SB 91. Once you made a selection, the selection was made. So again, we look forward to continuing to work together as we expend all of these resources and ensure that they reach those households that really need the assistance.
Great, thank you. It's an interesting question. If the tenant paid 25% to avoid eviction, is there any process for them to still receive 100% funding, or can they only receive their balance of 75%?
It would be the balance of the unpaid rent due. Yeah. So, and we would be paying 100% of that balance.
Because that's the part they owe. So, yes.
And then is the answer different if they borrowed money to pay the 25% or used a credit card?
No.
Unfortunately, no. Right. Unfortunately, the program is based on the federal rules, is based on what is owed. So if the 25% though was well spent because it has protected them from eviction.
Has the reservation table for ERAP 2 or round 2 been published?
I think we just got an email on this from a colleague, so I think it should be wrapped up shortly. So I think next 24 or so hours, it should be up. And actually, this came up. Sorry to confront you here, Hank, but I know we've been working on this together quite a bit. I think one thing just to emphasize here, there was a question in the chat to this effect in terms of how the state would be allocating round 2 funds, and just since this directly relates to the reservation table we're putting together for jurisdictions. One thing that we really kind of adapted to, align with how Treasury allocated funds for round 2, and understand that a lot of local government representatives are on the call here. They've already received their funding from Treasury as well. We're going to be following a similar model, really with total expected reservation for each jurisdiction. We'll be providing the initial 40% tranche of that that each jurisdiction is entitled to. Subsequent payments will be made once 75% of those funds are obligated. So the same parameters that Treasury has frankly put on all of us, not just local jurisdictions, but the state as well. So currently the state, directly is eligible to receive about $1.2 billion. We only have 40% of that in our account. We'll be making that available. And then once we obligate those funds, more funds will be made available. And then accordingly, we'll be transmitting that to local jurisdictions upon performance. So it's going to be the same model. So again, that kind of narrative of trying to be as consistent as possible for everyone for administrative ease.
Right. I think there's just a point of clarification on the question we had earlier about the 25% and the 75%. But what if they pay the 25% to the landlord? And so I guess there would be, you still owe 75% of unpaid rent, and that would be eligible for 100% reimbursement through the program. So even if they paid the landlord.
Yes.
Okay, there's a lot of questions here. So this is great. Will ERAP be used for legal assistance, and how? Amy?
I'm sorry, I got distracted typing in an answer for the question. Can you say that again? I apologize.
Will ERAP be used for legal assistance, and how?
Okay. According to our AB 832 and also the foundational, the prior SB 991, our priorities for the program are to focus on the eradication of the rental arrears and the stabilization of tenants through prospective payments. From there, it's the payment of utilities. Should there be kind of those priorities be satisfied, then we will be able to then move on to these additional uses of the funding.
And I think just to add to that, ultimately Amy was alluding to, the focus of the program is, of course, addressing rental arrears and, ongoing rents. The governor's budget this year enacted recently does provide maybe 35 million or so, if I can remember correctly, to the Judicial Council for ongoing landlord tenant mediation disputes, et cetera. I can throw some information in the chat as well to that effect. So that is in addition to funds I believe were made available last year as well to this end. So dedicated funding for those efforts. Eligible use for the state program, but definitely a dedicated use that is made available from the state.
Great. And Sherry Powers, if you could email us your question just to get better clarification. She meant to say earlier, instead of paying the 25% to the landlord, who did not pay 25% to the landlord. So I think we just want to know a little bit more about that situation so we could give you the correct answer. So if you can email that erap@hcd.ca.gov, that would be great. And then I think Jasmine Sanchez and Chris Riva, hello. They had a question about, does it make a difference if the landlord and the tenant apply together? And that definitely will help the process go quicker, so that if the applications match up, that it's easier on our processing to make sure that we have all the right paperwork in place to make that go a little bit faster. And are we able to disperse the supplemental payment 75% to the landlord who originally did not participate, but is now requesting to participate, even if the 25% payment had already gone out to the tenant? So if a tenant has received the 25%, can the landlord apply and receive payment?
I think, yeah, I think that's definitely feasible. It's just a matter of communicating with the program and explaining. It may require a conversation through the call center helpline or an email to the ERAP, email to, just particularly, identify the case ID and explain the situation. But, our intention always is to try to alleviate the rental debt and to make the landlords whole. And so if we, we understand that sometimes there's, missed opportunities with these, getting the applications in. But so we want to try and remedy that as quickly as possible. Let's see, there was a question on here, Veronica, not to interrupt you, but about case managers and staffing
Right.
to quickly around the review and approval of applications. And I did already address one question, in the writing, but I think it probably would be helpful to just mention. So yes, we have been staffing up and training the quality control reviewers that work on these individual cases. So that's one area of trying to add to our capacity and our ability to process applications. But bear in mind also that there is a prioritization in how the funds are delivered for applications. So that means, unfortunately, that some applications sit a little bit longer than others. And the prioritization is focused, it stems from the federal intent for us to focus on the 50% AMI and lower population. So those eligible households, 50% AMI and lower, do receive payment ahead of those that are, for instance, 50 to 80. Another area of prioritization is if the eligible household is situated in a community that has been disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. So those, rest assured that eventually the application will be attended to, but that's why the money is flowing to the very lowest of the low income based on the federal prioritization.
Great, thank you. So let's continue. This is, will it be possible to combine standard agreements from round 1 and round 2 if we haven't accepted the round 1 funds yet? Hank, are you able to answer that one?
I know the team is in the process of coming up with a consolidated process for instances such as this, so I can circle back and provide an answer in writing.
Thank you. I also want to let people know that this is not the last webinar we will hold on this subject matter. We are happy to also do regional webinars in your area, so definitely email us and request those, and we'll work with you on getting them done. And again, we'll be planning on partnering with our local partner network to hold more specific webinars to answer the more applicant questions that we are seeing in this webinar, as we see it's very needed. So thank you again, and please feel free to reach out to us and request those workshops. And with we'll take just maybe two more questions. And let's So since payment will be 100% of rent owed, will the priority of below 30% AMI be dismissed and go by date applied? We need to get payments out ASAP. We agree. And so I will let Miles or Hank take that one.
Sure. No, that's a good question. Ultimately, we agree get these funds out as soon as possible, but consistent with the current program design, and really it was alluded to earlier, the federal intentions on stabilizing households 50% AMI and below, and of course 30% AMI and below, which actually is a pretty significant population of the applications and households that we've assisted to this date. So it will continue to be one of our top priorities, but also, frankly, with the capacity we continue to expand at the state level, while this will be a priority, frankly, 50% to up to 80%. I mean, we're trying to open up this program as fast as we can, and make sure all prioritization levels are addressed. It's just we're going to continue to maintain that prioritization level based on need and by AMI. So
great. And the last question we'll answer live. And again, we'll take these questions and send out a follow-up email once the answers are available. How many months of prospective rent are covered? And are there any funds in AB 832 to do more application assistance specifically for individuals who have barriers with language, et cetera?
Yeah, so on the latter half of that question, in terms of, additional assistance, case management, and so forth, specifically to round two, since this is a longer term, multi-year program, the funds made available to the state and as well as local jurisdictions, those expire then the federal fiscal year in 2025. So there's a 15% total admin that's available to jurisdictions. So as part of that increased admin, we fully expect not just for our state program, but also our jurisdictions across the state to really make use of those funds available and see how they best fit within their communities. And on the first part, could you repeat that one, Veronica? I missed the first half of it.
It was how many months of prospective rent will be made available?
Sure. So a prospective rent is provided 3 months at a time, and then the eligible household must recertify their eligibility essentially, and then another 3 months of assistance can be provided. But as referred to earlier, 18 months of total assistance can be provided for the program as a whole. So whether that's several months of rental arrears or prospective rent, 18 months per household is the limitations for operating under federal law.
Great, thank you. Again, thank you everybody for your questions. I'm going to turn it over to Secretary for a few closing remarks.
Thank you, Veronica. Thank you. Thank you all so much for joining us. As you can see, new law, lots of questions. The purpose of gathering today was to really spend the time going through the various elements of this new law that will enable us to get this program out to serve more people, but also to get the resources out in a more expedited manner. As Veronica mentioned, this is not the only webinar or opportunity that we will have to share this information. I think right now our priority is to ensure that the key stakeholders that are working with us, whether it be the local partner networks, the legislative offices, the local jurisdictions, that we are able to bring this information and create a space to answer as many questions as you all have. But I think the next step will be for us to partner with you to break down this information in ways that allow renters and landlords to actually access the program. And so, this week we're, of course, very much focused on updating the website, getting materials out, having these convenings. But we're also very much looking to learn from those of you that are on the ground doing this work, helping renters and landlords with completing those applications to help us, communicate and get this information out, and also to help us find simple language to be able to explain the benefits of the program, and to address any concerns, that landlords or renters may have in terms of accessing the program. Our goal, as I mentioned, is to address in the short term all rental debt that has been accumulated because of COVID-19. We know that the impact of this pandemic was uneven, and we know that renters, particularly low-income renters, were most impacted. And so we want to ensure, right, that as we move into rebuilding our economy, that we do so in a way that brings people in, and that, of course, means ensuring that low-income renters and landlords, right? Small mom and pop landlords that are also part of this, the fabric of housing market, that they're also able to access this program. So we look to you to help us get this information out, get it out in a way that allows for people to have greater access, and ultimately to help us become the state that leads the rental relief program in an inclusive and equitable way, in a way that demonstrates that the investment that has been made by the state and by the federal government was important and necessary. So thank you again for joining us. And just before I turn it over to Veronica, just want to acknowledge just the amazing work by the team at agency and at HCD. And of course, our colleagues in the governor's office, and the many stakeholders that help shape the various elements of this. And thanks to Governor Newsom for signing this bill into law, and to the Assembly and the Senate for standing with renters and landlords and working together as we rebuild an equitable economic, really an equitable economy here in our state. So thank you, Veronica.
Thank you, everybody. And thank you all for joining us. We will look forward to working with you in the future. We will make this PowerPoint and the recording available as well. So we'll send an email out for everybody when it's ready. And again, answers to all the questions that we weren't able to get to today. So thank you, and we look forward to helping Californians. Bye.